Now, when I say if it doesn't start, it's not road legal, you might say, well, what if your car breaks down? It doesn't immediately become not road legal. That is true, and you'd be right for a normal car, but it isn't a normal car because it's never been road registered. And if you want to register a one-off amateur build like this, I didn't actually build this car, but I knew the person that did, and that's a story I'll go into a little bit later. Then it needs to have an IVA, Independent Vehicle Approval. And if you are so inclined, there's a 330-page manual downloadable on the government website. It tells you everything that you need to know to meet the criteria for a vehicle that's going to be tested. Although nothing in here mentions that the vehicle needs to start. However, there is emissions tests, decibel tests to test the sound, so it's kind of obvious. How can you possibly do those tests if the vehicle's not running? There's also a load of random things that this vehicle needs before it's ready to take its IVA test. Compliance stickers. So I'm going to pop the hood and the nose cone and leave them off for now while I start these jobs. This basically tells anyone that the brake reservoir should only take 0.4 brake fluid. It needs to be within 150 ml of the brake fluid reservoir. Now, compliance stickers, sir, because I do have one more of those to do, is one of 5 easy jobs that I've got to do to bring this car up to the standard to pass its IVA. As well as the 5 easy jobs, I've also got what I would classify as, because I'm not a mechanic, 3 hard jobs. One of those being the fact that it doesn't start. This void here should have a battery in it. There's a clue to why this car's not starting. I do have the old battery, it's part of the problem. So I'll go into that a little bit later. With my Land Rover, I had a bit of an epiphany because it had the same thing where I learnt something about batteries, which I've then come to the conclusion that that's what this car needs, I think. But for now, let me show you around this vehicle, because if you are not into your cars or you don't understand cars very well, these are a really good place to start because they're so simple and you can see everything really easily. It's not hidden somewhere. There's not much to them. They're really simple driving machines. And a good place to start is the engine. This is a 2.1 litre Ford Pinto engine out of Ford Sierra with carburetors, Weber twin 45s, stainless steel exhaust system coming straight out the side of the car on the driver's side, coolant expansion tank, and you can see the hoses running straight to the radiator and then obviously into the engine block itself to do its cooling job. Down here we've got the distributor, which tells the spark plugs when to spark. You can see the steering column running all the way down and obviously into the steering rack itself. When you're sat in the driver's position, I can put my whole palm flat on the floor. And that's my MK Indy Lotus 7 style kit car. Remember when I said I didn't build this car, but I knew the person that did? It's easiest if we do it in like a timeline. August 2018. My dad and a friend of his had got an MK sports car kit, which is what this is, lying around in the garage. It had not been touched for a few years. I said, I'll buy your friend out. We have then something that we can share. You then build it, because he just retired at that point. He had built one of these before, about 10 years previous. The key difference was that the donor car, a Ford Sierra, which is the same as this, he just took everything out of the Ford Sierra and put it in the kit. So it was basic plug and play. One of my conditions for me to buy in was that we get a good engine, which we did. 1 month later, October 2018, we picked up this engine, the one that is in this car right now, which is a Ford Pinto engine, still out of a Sierra, but this one had been made up to race. Cosworth rods, it's got a fast road cam, Weber 45 carbs, it's got a Lighton flywheel. It's also been bored out to increase the capacity from 2 litre up to 2.1 litres. One of the things that my dad said, and those words of wisdom will echo forevermore when I'm working on this car, is when you start modifying things, if you don't know what you're doing, it's very easy to become stuck, which is exactly what happened with this car. He self-professed he didn't know what he was doing when things got really complicated performance-wise. So October 2018, we found this engine and it's back now in the garage, getting made up, ready to go into this kit car. In January 2019, the engine's in and it's running for the first time. Fast forward from January to March and it's almost done. This is where things went a bit wrong. The engine develops timing issues that my dad could not figure out, and it ended up getting left for nearly 3 years. Summer 2022. And it's at this point that unfortunately my dad fell ill. This is where I come in and decide to start trying to work on the car and maybe pass its IVA myself. But this timing issues had me stumped as well. For a bit of investigation though, I found that the distributor, an aftermarket part, which is where the first hiccup came, buying an aftermarket distributor, which sends out the timing from the distributor to the spark plugs that tells it when to spark, had an issue and it chewed up a shaft inside the engine. So I had a quick crash course on mechanics, and by myself I had the engine and gearbox out of this car. Not very graciously either, might I add, because this place stinks of gear oil, because when the gearbox came out at an angle, it just dropped all of its oil. And bearing in mind, this was the first thing that I did mechanically at all. Changed the auxiliary shaft, sourced a new distributor, all that. No more timing issues. It still wouldn't reliably start. And by this time, we're in winter 2022. And that is where my role in this car then ended for a little while. We're now in 2025, and you might be wondering, why is there a 3-year gap? Well, it was at the end of 2022 where my dad unfortunately passed. If you know anything about grief or you've ever lost someone close to you, you would know that it takes time. Sufficient time has passed now, and it's really time that I crack on with this and get this car done. So there's a lot riding on this for me. This has to work, and I'm sure it will eventually, but it'd be nice if it worked a little bit easier without any more hiccups. You might have seen on some of my other videos some wild camping, hiking, road trips, and just because this car's really impractical, and I mean it is very impractical, it's really tight in there, and it's also got no storage space to carry anything if you're going to go on a road trip. I'm not going to let it stop me. I'm still going to be doing stuff like that in this car once it's done. So if you want to see any of that in my follow-on videos to this, make sure you subscribe and tell the algorithm that you want to see it when it pops up. And I would really appreciate that as well. Before I get carried away with any road tripping though, I really do need to get this road legal. So I'll start with my 5 easy jobs and then move on to my 3 hard. This compliance sticker needs to be under here next to the pedals, which basically says that if you adjust the pedals, well, don't adjust the pedals. And there's 2 easy jobs that need doing in this area, because when I first picked up this car in the summer of 2022, one of the first things that I did was extend the indicators out onto the mudguard so that it would be IVA compliant, because you need to have an indicator on the mudguard, which is different to back when my dad first did his car, but that's why he's put them on the side, because that's how he did it the first time round. So this wiring is a mess, and I really need to tidy it up if it's going to be IVA compliant. It's not supposed to be bare like this. The second thing is these headlights. This one's fine. This one is not fine. That doesn't look good, and I think it's going to need a new light bar completely. And this is actually a clothing rail. and the cover is a spray paint cap. So that's all that nasty tape off. I'm not sure what I was thinking wrapping it in that. Sometimes you've got to do it wrong first to then understand how bad something is and then do it right properly the next time. This split conduit is going to be much neater. One thing that I do want to do, which is not absolutely necessary but it would be good practice, is just to jack the car up and then turn the wheels, make sure nothing snags, which is an IVA compliance thing, but for your braided brake lines. Well, I think that's much better, and it's going to protect the wire a lot better. Not going to look as crappy with all that tape on it. I've actually had to wait quite a while for these. I took them somewhere originally to be fabricated because I can't weld. These were welded onto a clothing rail, which was unnecessary, and it just got in the way. So these are much smaller and will be more sturdy. Now, what's happened there? Oh. As you can see, the rear panel's just broken. It's not a big deal because this is something that I needed to address anyway, and I might just change it completely because it's naff. My job originally on this was going to be to remove the sharp edges that run down here, because on an IVA test the examiner will come along with a dome shaped type thing. I'm going to be using my fist as a replacement, and if the dome shape can get in there, which here it can, then it can't be a sharp edge. Which is why I was going to remove this to trim the outside of it. However, it fell apart, so now I'm going to have to think of a new fix completely. Well, doesn't look too bad. Definitely an improvement. I've just used this carbon fibre tape type stuff. Not the smoothest, but it's definitely an improvement. Another easy fix, and this is a bit of an annoying one, because if I would have known when I was buying parts for this car, obviously my dad wasn't aware, then I'd have just bought a fuel cap that was IVA compliant, and this one sadly isn't IVA compliant, and that is because when you undo the cap I can remove the key. And if I can remove the key, I can lose the cap while I'm at the fuel pumps. And I think that's probably their argument for it. I can't see any other logic behind that. If this doesn't have a mechanism that stops me removing the key when this is out of the filler cap, then it needs to have a tether. I can put a tether on this part and I can just take the fuel cap out and drill a hole just on the inside of the nozzle here, which will be on the inside of the pipe so that it's not going to leak. Well, that worked out a lot better than I thought it would. The end, I've just drilled a hole and then put a nut and bolt through it on a stainless steel wire, and then I've just clipped the wire at the end and done a bit like a keyring effect onto the cap, and it works perfectly. Well, they're the easy jobs, but I did say there would be some hard jobs, and I've categorised that for a specific reason. And the reason is my mechanical talent will have reached its limit. And I know what you're thinking. Split conduit is the limit, but it pretty much is when it comes to this, because I'm completely self-taught off YouTube, which is a pretty dangerous way to do mechanics, self-taught from YouTube. And that leads me nicely onto the next problem to fix. I did say there's 3 hard problems. One of them is starting the engine, which we're going to do last because I'm waiting on the battery. The second thing, the engine needs to be on for me to fix it, or check it at least for the IVA, which is the decibel limit. I'm not really sure if this engine's too loud. I'm really not sure what to do. Maybe I'll have to just buy another exhaust, which I don't want to do because I really like this exhaust. It's stainless steel and it looks great. What I'm about to do now, the other hard fix, is the oil catch can, which I'd never heard of before working on this car. In fact, I don't even think it's a thing in any regular car that you would buy from a dealer. And this is it here. If you're not aware of what an oil catch can does, then you won't know that this is in completely the wrong space, and hence the reason why it needs to be moved. Now, I did actually put this in myself a while ago incorrectly because I didn't really know much about oil catch cans. I was just repairing a leak, how my dad had set this up. And what he'd done basically was run a hose pipe, and I mean a literal garden hose pipe, because he loved using that type of stuff for some reason, from here, and he ran it down and underneath to where there was a little plastic box with a filter in it. Wasn't quite sure what the purpose of that filter was, but then from the filter it fed directly back into the sump. So oil was effectively coming out of the crankcase, getting fed down through a little filter and back into the crankcase. And it wasn't the actual main oil filter, which is screwed into the side of the engine block itself. It was like an additional filter. And when I looked into it, it was some variation of an oil catch can, which is what I then Googled and went to buy. Couldn't find an oil catch can for an actual Ford Pinto. There was just aftermarket ones because it seems to be an aftermarket thing. So I went and bought this, which is not much use down here, and let me explain why. So in here is a crankshaft, and when we bought this engine, if you remember, my stipulation was that we get a decent engine, and this came with a rally cam, which was pretty unsuitable for road use. It meant that the engine was just running really fast at an idle, and it would have been really not fun to drive on the road. So we changed the cam from a rally cam to a fast road cam, or my dad did. I don't think I could personally do that very well. I probably could if I had to, but I definitely wouldn't know what I'm doing to start with. I'd maybe have to refer myself to the Ford Sierra handbook, which is pretty much what my dad used and didn't use YouTube. Ironically, I sold the rally cam to someone who uses Ford Pinto engines in his rally cars. And when he came and I asked him, just have a quick look over, see if everything looks okay, if there's anything that he immediately identifies as being out of whack. And he identified this not doing its job correctly and just being in the completely the wrong place. So I need to move this, and it needs to come up, and it needs to be above this crankcase, and that is so that the air flows and not the oil. So the point of an oil catch can is when the engine is on, the crankcase is full of like a misty substance which contains a bit of crap in it and oil and other stuff, and all the crap gets blown through into the catch can, which collects it and stops it being stuck in your crankcase and then settling on your valves and making a mess. So it's supposed to make your engine a bit more efficient, a bit cleaner, or it would do if it was in the correct place. So this needs to move. And the other thing that I need to do, because what I don't want is to build up crankcase pressure. So this needs a breather on it. Now, I don't have a huge amount of experience working with cars, but I do have an attitude that anything is figure outable, and these things are not rocket science, so it shouldn't, he says, shouldn't be an issue, including this, which is what I'm going to do now. So it's got a little baffle on one side, the intake, just generally to stop stuff going back the other way, I think. This now needs to sit above the crankcase. Ideally, I was just going to pick up off this and have it there. This dead space here is where the battery is going to sit, which isn't there right now. Know whether I'm going to have to move these yet. And that's all these pieces cut to length. So I'll just put a bit of twist in this to keep it off the bonnet. The breather is in place. And the good thing that I like about this is that this is clear, the outlet, so I'll have some idea if it is kicking anything down, I'll know. I'll be interested to see if anything does come down to go back into the sump or not. My battery has arrived, and then it's going to be time for bed, and then the next morning I'm going to start this for the first time in a long time, and I'm hoping that that battery does the job. Before I do, I'll tell you why I think that that battery is going to be the fix to the problems that this engine has had. And since buying the battery, I've come to learn a few extra things, which has put my mind in a little bit of doubt on whether I should have bought a battery as big as that, and I could have got away with something a little bit smaller. I did say at the start that I learned something. I thought I'd learned something from my Land Rover, why that had problems starting, and that this was the same, for the same reason. One thing that I couldn't understand with my Land Rover was the battery that was in it was a very good battery, but it used to drop voltage overnight. And a Land Rover Discovery 3 is exceptionally electrically thirsty. So it doesn't go down well if the battery is weak, if it's low voltage, which mine was. It would crank the engine, turning the engine over, but it just wasn't starting. I gave it a jump start with another battery that I had that I knew was on full voltage, which was this one. It's heavy duty, so I thought it would be enough. But what's really interesting is the CCA, the cold crank ampage. It's basically how powerful that battery can surge electric. Now the CCA rating on this battery is 680, and when I use this battery to jump start my Land Rover, it would still crank for a while and it'd take it quite a lot of time, but it would then start. What I couldn't understand was, if I took the old battery out, that was a really good battery but dropped voltage overnight, then I charged it, put it in fresh, it would start straight away. The cold crank ampage, and on this battery it's at 680, which is way below what is recommended for a Land Rover Discovery 3. And that got me thinking specifically about this engine. When I was trying to start it, was having a similar issue where I would have the heavy duty battery that I used to assist my Land Rover hooked up onto the old battery for this kit car. It would crank and crank and crank and it wouldn't quite start, and then it would start, but it wouldn't start every time, and this engine would never start under the power of its own battery, which I thought was a new, and again says heavy duty. Maybe they just all say that. I did not think for 1 second that it could possibly be the battery why this engine wouldn't start. So I'm really excited to have a new battery in this, where the cold crank rating is 740. It's not high enough to be in a Land Rover Discovery 3, but at the same time, this is still much, much higher than what any average battery on a normal car would be. And given that this engine was set up for hot rod racing, it needs to spin really fast to be able to start, and it needs that surge of power. At least that's my understanding anyway. And we'll put that understanding to the test tomorrow. A quick once over of the car, check that it's still got oil in it, of course it has, and I'm going to use this little adaptation so that I can see that there is a spark going to the spark plug. So the popping and banging, I think, is the timing completely out. I say completely out, it can't be that far out, and it only takes a minor adjustment to the distributor, find the sweet spot, tighten it back up. Settled down a little bit, however it is idling a bit low. If I'm in the car and holding the accelerator open slightly, it'll idle at a much higher speed, but really what needs to be adjusted is the carburetors. These cars have a knack of drawing a lot of attention, and I've been joined by my neighbour Glyn, who is also rocking a funnel shirt. Not one of mine though, not happy about that. Now you don't get carburetors in cars anymore, but Glyn is from the era where they were in cars. So he knew his way around these a little bit, and he advised on a few things which made the idle run a bit smoother. While the engine was at idle, roughly where it would be when it's fully done, I took this opportunity to do my decibel test. The decibel limit is 99 decibels. Max 66. So it ended up being way below, but happy that I checked it. And speaking of ticking off jobs, you can see now that this is turnkey. Here's the start after the carbs have had a little bit of a play. You might be wondering what Glyn is holding up to the carbs airflow meter. He's testing the airflow going into the carbs, which is uneven across all four, which is not ideal, but this car does need to go into a garage to have brake horsepower and axle weights done for its IVA, and when it's there it can go and be professionally set up on a rolling road so that it runs perfectly through all the gears at all the speeds.